The church smelled of lilies and rain-soaked wood. I remember thinking how ironic that was, how death always smells too clean. My name is Evelyn Carrington, and at 68, I'd never imagined standing beside my husband's casket feeling more confusion than grief. Gerald had been the center of my world for 42 years. Or maybe I'd just told myself that so many times, I'd forgotten to question it. As the choir sang Amazing Grace, I held onto the edge of my black gloves, willing my hands not to shake. That's when I heard it. A whisper, soft, deliberate, cruel. "Finally free," said my daughter Melissa, her voice calm, almost relieved. First I thought I'd imagined it. The words sank into me like cold water, sharp enough to make me forget how to breathe. But then, over her shoulder, I saw Mr. Dalton, Gerald's lawyer, watching us from the last pew. His lips curved, not in sympathy, not in sorrow, but in something disturbingly close to satisfaction. I froze. The air felt heavy, like everyone around me was in on a secret I hadn't been told. After the service, condolences blurred together. Faces I hadn't seen in years pressed in with murmured pity. Melissa moved like she was floating through them, detached, composed. When I caught her eye, she smiled politely like a stranger. By the time the last car left the cemetery, I was alone under the gray sky, the earth freshly turned and damp beneath my shoes. I stared at Gerald's name carved in granite. Beloved husband, devoted father. Felt like a lie, all of it. That night I couldn't sleep. The house was too still. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked louder than I remembered, like it was marking down to something. I poured myself tea, but my hands trembled so much I spilled half of it on the counter. Gerald's study door was ajar. It had always been his space, locked, private, untouchable. I stood there a long time before I pushed it open. Inside, the scent of his cologne lingered, woody, heavy. His desk was immaculate, as if he might walk back in any moment and scold me for snooping. But the key was still in the top drawer, glinting under the lamplight. My heart pounded. I turned it slowly. Inside were neat stacks of documents, sealed envelopes, and one small black notebook with his initials embossed in gold. I hesitated before opening it, half afraid of what I'd find. The first page was dated just 2 months ago. Dalton says Melissa agreed. She understands what needs to be done. Evelyn must not find out until it's over. I read that line again and again, the words blurring as my throat tightened. Melissa agreed. What did they mean? Why would my daughter, my only child, be in secret meetings with her father's lawyer? I flipped through the pages, my breath catching at each entry. There were notes about transfers, property decisions, and something labeled simply, the revised will. The will. I felt sick. I'd never been interested in money, not once in my life. But the way Gerald had written, so clinical, so calculating, made it sound like this was more than inheritance. It sounded like a plan. The next morning, I called Mr. Dalton's office. His assistant told me he was unavailable, that all matters related to Gerald's estate would be handled at the scheduled reading. The reading. It was set for Friday morning, 3 days away. When Melissa came by that evening, she carried flowers, her tone overly sweet. "Mom, you should rest," she said, kissing my cheek. "Dad wouldn't want you stressing about things now." There was something in her eyes I couldn't name. Pity, maybe. Or guilt. After she left, I sat by the window watching her car disappear down the driveway. The wind picked up, and for a moment I saw Gerald's reflection in the glass. His stern expression, the one he wore whenever I asked too many questions. And I realized something I should have seen years ago. I hadn't just lost a husband. I'd lost the illusion of knowing who he truly was. And come Friday, I'd find out what he'd been hiding from me all along. Friday morning arrived with an eerie calm, the kind that makes you feel something's waiting just beyond the edges of silence. I sat at my vanity, staring at my reflection, pale, older than I remembered. Grief does that, it speeds up time in the mirror. Melissa picked me up in her silver Lexus, dressed too perfectly for a funeral week, hair pinned neatly, lipstick unshaken. She smiled when I opened the door, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Ready, Mom." "Ready." The word rang hollow. The law office was in downtown Charleston, one of those stately old buildings with brass railings and too much echo. The walls were lined with certificates, and behind the mahogany desk sat Mr. Dalton, polished as ever, his gray suit crisp, his gold pen glinting. "Mrs. Carrington," he said warmly, gesturing toward a leather chair. "Please have a seat." "Melissa." He said her name differently with familiarity. My stomach tightened. The reading began with routine formalities. Gerald's will, dated only 6 weeks before his death, was read aloud by Dalton's assistant. I tried to focus, but my pulse was pounding in my ears. Then, as the words unfolded, the room began to tilt. "To my beloved wife, Evelyn Carrington, I leave the family home for her lifetime use and comfort." For her lifetime use. Not ownership. Lifetime use. All business holdings, accounts, and remaining estate to pass in full to my daughter, Melissa and Carrington. The pen slipped from my fingers. Dalton paused, his eyes flicking toward me as if gauging the damage. Melissa kept her gaze fixed on the papers, her mouth set in a small, polite curve that could almost be mistaken for sadness. I heard my own voice before I realized I was speaking. "Gerald promised we built that company together. I was there when he started it." Dalton cleared his throat softly. "Mr. Carrington made these changes in accordance with updated family arrangements, Mrs. Carrington. He was quite clear about his wishes." Family arrangements. The phrase dripped with implication. Melissa finally looked at me, then really looked. Her eyes were calm, almost pitying. "Mom, please. It's what Dad wanted. You'll be fine." I wanted to ask her why. Why she sounded like this was mercy, not betrayal. But the words caught in my throat. Dalton folded the papers neatly and leaned back. "There's also a personal letter, addressed to you, Mrs. Carrington. Mr. Carrington requested it be read privately." He slid a sealed envelope across the table. Gerald's handwriting, strong, familiar, stared back at me. "Would you like a moment alone?" Dalton asked smoothly. I nodded. Melissa stepped outside, her heels echoing down the hallway. Dalton lingered by the door for a second too long, his eyes still carrying that faint smile. Then he closed it behind him. My fingers trembled as I opened the letter. The scent of Gerald's cologne clung faintly to the paper. "Evelyn, if you're reading this, I suppose my time is over. You've been a loyal wife, but you've also been blind to many things. Melissa understands what needs to be done. I trust her more than anyone now. She'll ensure the legacy survives. Even if you disagree with how it's done, don't fight her. Let her lead. It's better this way." I felt the world tilt. My hand shook so hard I nearly tore the paper. He trusted her more than anyone. Even in death, he found a way to silence me. I folded the letter back into the envelope and stood slowly. When I stepped outside, Melissa and Dalton were standing closer than I liked, his hand brushing her shoulder as he handed her a folder. The sight hit me like a blade. "Mom," Melissa said, startled. "You're done already?" I didn't answer. I just looked at Dalton. "You knew this would happen." His smile didn't falter. "Your husband was a pragmatic man. He wanted stability." "Stability," I repeated softly. Funny word for betrayal. He inclined his head slightly, as if I'd complimented him, then excused himself to another room. Melissa sighed. "Please, Mom, don't make this harder than it has to be." I stared at her, the little girl who used to fall asleep on my lap, the one who cried when her father raised his voice. Now she was standing there, calm and unflinching, holding the papers that erased my life. "You were in on it," I whispered. She didn't deny it. Her silence was worse than a confession. Outside, the rain had started again. I walked to the car in numb silence, each step heavier than the last. Inside, the scent of her perfume filled the air, cold, floral, detached. "Halfway home," she said quietly, "Dad wanted to protect what he built. You would have given it away." "Given it away?" I turned to her. "Melissa, I gave him everything." She didn't respond. When we pulled up to the house, I couldn't bring myself to go inside. The windows glowed warmly, but it felt like someone else's home now. Everything inside, the furniture, the walls, the memories, had been rewritten. Melissa touched my arm before leaving. "You'll see, Mom. This was for the best." Her words lingered long after she drove away. I stood in the doorway of the house I no longer owned, clutching the letter that ended my marriage long after my husband's death. And as thunder rolled in the distance, a new thought began to form, quiet, dangerous, unstoppable. If Gerald and Melissa had buried their secrets this deep, then I would dig deeper. Because whatever legacy they were protecting, it wasn't his. And soon I would find out whose it really was. The storm that night didn't stop until dawn. The windows rattled like they were arguing with the wind, and every creak of the house felt like Gerald's ghost pacing the halls. I didn't sleep. I just sat at the kitchen table, his letter in front of me, reading it over and over until the ink felt burned into my mind. By morning I had stopped crying. The tears had dried into something heavier, resolve. I'd spent my whole life trusting what people told me. My husband, my daughter, the world. But standing in that empty kitchen, I decided I was done being blind. Gerald wanted me quiet, contained, obedient. And Melissa had learned from the best. The first place I looked was his study again. Not for memories this time, but for answers. Behind the desk, I ran my fingers along the wood paneling, searching for anything that felt off. Gerald was a creature of habit. Every drawer aligned, every paper clipped. But there, just behind the row of encyclopedias, was a gap in the panel. A tiny latch, nearly invisible. When I pressed it, the panel loosened. Inside was a narrow compartment, dusty, hidden. Inside, I found a faded photograph. Gerald, years younger, standing in front of what looked like a small farmhouse, and beside him a woman I didn't recognize. Her smile was soft, familiar in a way that twisted my stomach. On the back, in Gerald's handwriting, was a single word: "Our beginning." There was also a folded deed, dated 1983, transferring property in Beaumont County, South Carolina. It wasn't in our records, not in any of the files I'd kept. It had been bought under a trust name I didn't recognize. When I searched the name online later, Carrington Development Trust, one detail froze me. It had been recently reactivated. By Melissa and Carrington 3 months before Gerald's death. My chest tightened. That was the same month he'd started writing in that black notebook. It wasn't just about inheritance. They'd been preparing something together, reviving something old. Something Gerald had wanted buried. I needed to see that place. So, the next morning I drove to Beaumont. The road stretched quiet between pine trees and farmland. After an hour I found the property. The farmhouse still stood, though time had gnawed at its edges. Windows cracked, roof sagging, wild vines crawling up the porch rails. A padlock hung on the front door, new and shiny. I circled around the back. A faint path cut through the weeds to a small shed, half collapsed. Inside, everything smelled of dust and metal. Old ledgers, rolled blueprints, a rusted safe. When I pried it open, God help me, I found stacks of yellowed documents. Ledgers from the early days of Gerald's business, back when we were struggling newlyweds. Contracts signed by names I didn't know, and one ledger page that made my skin crawl. Payments. Regular deposits. Marked D. Whitley Care Services. Whitley. The woman in the photograph had that name scrawled faintly on the back. Diana Whitley. Care Services. I sank to the floor, my breath catching in my chest. Gerald had always told me the early years were hard, that he'd taken on side projects to fund the business. But these payments went on for decades. It wasn't business. It was support. And Melissa had reactivated the trust in that woman's name. I pulled out my phone and searched again. Diana Whitley, Charleston. The name brought up an obituary dated just 6 months ago. She died quietly, survived by one child. One daughter. The name underneath hit me like a blade. Melissa Whitley. The room seemed to tilt around me. My fingers went numb. Melissa Whitley. My daughter's full name had always been Melissa Carrington. Except it wasn't. My husband's legacy wasn't about business or property. It was about blood. He'd built a second life. Another woman. Another family. And when that woman died, He'd brought their daughter, into mine. The whispers, the secrecy, the will, everything made sense in one brutal flash. I wasn't just betrayed. I was erased. By the time I got back to the car, my hands were trembling so hard I could barely start the engine. The rain had begun again, fine and cold. In the rearview mirror I saw the house shrinking behind me, swallowed by mist. Somewhere out there, Gerald's lawyer still smiled, knowing I'd been the fool in everyone's story. But not anymore. If they wanted the past buried, I'd dig it out with my own hands. Because before I die, they'll all know what I know now. That freedom isn't inherited. It's taken. The morning after Beaumont felt unreal, like I was living in someone else's memory. The truth sat inside me like a stone I couldn't swallow. Melissa wasn't mine. She was the daughter of the woman my husband had kept hidden for decades. But I had raised her, fed her, loved her, carried her through every heartbreak. And now she was the one who'd helped bury me alive in my own life. I spent that day gathering proof. Every document from that hidden safe. Every note from the black notebook. Every photograph, every signature. I didn't know yet what I'd do with them. I just knew I needed them all in my hands. By afternoon I called Dalton's office. His assistant hesitated before saying he was in meetings all day. I said I'd wait. And I did. By 6 p.m. his office lights still burned. The rain had turned the streets to glass when I walked in, papers clutched in a manila folder. The receptionist's polite smile faltered when she saw my face. "Mrs. Carrington." "I won't be long," I said. Dalton looked up as I entered. His surprise lasted barely a second before that professional calm slid back into place. "Evelyn, I wasn't expecting." "You never do," I interrupted, placing the folder on his desk. "Do you want to explain these or should I start reading them out loud?" He didn't move. Only his eyes flicked to the folder, then back to me. "I don't think this is wise." "What wasn't wise," I said, "was trusting you, or believing my husband's lies, or letting my daughter," my voice cracked, "my daughter become your accomplice." He sighed, slow and deliberate. "Evelyn, I think you misunderstand. Gerald was trying to protect everyone. When Diana died, he wanted to make sure." "Don't say her name," I whispered. For a moment something flickered behind his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or fear. "He loved you in his way," he said quietly. "But his past had obligations. Melissa didn't know the full truth until recently." I laughed softly, bitter. "And you told her, didn't you? You made her your weapon." He stood up. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." I met his gaze. "Oh, I do. A man who thinks power makes him untouchable. A girl who thinks money makes her free. But I've lived longer than both of you combined in experience, Mr. Dalton. And I've learned something you haven't." I opened the folder, pulling out the deed, the letters, the ledgers. "You see, people forget. Paper doesn't lie." He reached out quickly. "Evelyn." I stepped back. "Don't. Not another word." I placed my phone on his desk and hit play. His voice came through, the one I'd secretly recorded on our last call, when he'd slipped up about the will's arrangements. His tone cold, measured, unmistakable. For the first time since Gerald's funeral, I saw that composure break. "You recorded me?" "I protected myself," I said. "Something Gerald never taught me to do." The silence between us thickened. Then I gathered my papers and turned for the door. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice low. "To tell the truth," I said. "And I'm not asking permission this time." The next morning, the headlines did what I couldn't have dreamed of months ago. Prominent attorney under investigation for fraudulent estate transfers. Carrington Holdings faces legal inquiry. Melissa called me that afternoon, her voice trembling. "Mom, what did you do?" I stood by the window watching the same rainfall that had followed me all week. "I told the truth," I said. "You should try it sometime." She cried. "I didn't." There was nothing left to grieve, only what remained to rebuild. When the reporters came, I didn't hide. I told them everything, not out of revenge, but because silence had already cost me too much. And that night, as I sat in Gerald's old study, now emptied of secrets, I finally felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. The kind that doesn't come from forgiveness, but from reclaiming your own voice. I looked at the photo of the farmhouse one last time. Then I burned it. Some ghosts deserve to stay buried, but the truth never does. Sometimes the worst betrayals don't come from strangers. They come from the people we built our lives around. Evelyn lost everything, but she found the one thing her husband and daughter never truly had: freedom. If this story moved you, tell me in the comments. Would you have exposed them? Or walked away in silence? The courthouse steps were slick with rain the morning after the hearing. Reporters waited like vultures, umbrellas black as wings. They wanted a quote, a tear, something sharp for the evening news. I gave them none. I just walked past, clutching my coat, the echo of their cameras clicking behind me like a firing squad. Inside, the verdict had been clear. The trust restored, the fraud exposed. Melissa and Dalton both stripped of their claims. Justice, they said. But justice doesn't feel like victory when it leaves you standing alone. I returned to the house, the one Gerald built, the one Melissa once called hers. It was silent, hollow. The air smelled of dust and memory. The old portrait of Gerald still hung in the hallway. His painted eyes followed me as I passed. For a moment I almost spoke to him, then stopped. You don't speak to ghosts when you've already buried the lies they left you. The neighborhood had changed. The postman avoided my gate now. The neighbors who once waved across their lawns looked away politely, whispering behind curtains. To them, I was the widow who dragged her own daughter to court, the woman who made family secrets public. Some nights I wondered if they were right. Maybe I should have stayed quiet, played the gracious matriarch until I faded away. But then I'd see Melissa's face in my mind, the arrogance, the coldness, and I'd remember her whisper at the funeral, finally free. No, silence wasn't an option. Freedom had always been my right to reclaim. I spent those weeks sorting through what was left of my life. Old photographs, unopened letters, furniture that had outlived its purpose. In the back of Gerald's desk, I found one last envelope. My name on it. His handwriting, careful but fading. I sat by the window and opened it slowly. If you're reading this, Evelyn, it began. Then I'm gone, and the truth has burned everything I thought I could hide. He confessed to the affair. To the daughter he'd never had the courage to acknowledge publicly. I wanted to protect you from humiliation, he wrote. But in doing so, I only gave it power. I'm sorry. I read those words again and again until they blurred. Not from grief. Grief was an old friend by now, but from something close to release. The truth didn't heal me, but it stopped the bleeding. Days passed. I started keeping the windows open again. One morning, the mail brought a small card. No return address. Just a line written in handwriting I didn't recognize. You were right to fight back. For the first time in months, I smiled. Maybe there were still people who saw beyond scandal, beyond gossip. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. That night, I lit the fireplace and sat beside it, watching the flames shift and whisper. The rain outside softened, and for once it didn't sound like sorrow, it sounded like cleansing. The truth had cost me my family, my reputation, and the illusion of peace. But it had given me something else. The quiet certainty that I could stand alone and still not fall apart. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the firelight touch my face. For the first time since the funeral, I felt something simple, something steady. Freedom. The kind that no one can whisper away. Spring arrived late that year. The first blooms didn't show until April, stubborn little things forcing their way through cold soil. I understood them more than anyone. Life doesn't ask permission to start over, it just does. The house had changed. I sold most of the furniture, painted the walls soft cream, and took down Gerald's portrait. Not out of spite, just to make space for air. In its place, I hung a single photograph. The lake where we'd once spent our summers before everything twisted into secrets. It reminded me that not all of the past was poison. Some of it was just human. I started volunteering at the town library. It was small, 2 rooms, the smell of paper and dust and old laughter, but it gave my hands something to do. Children came after school, dropping their bags, asking for stories, and I found that I still knew how to tell them. I'd sit in the reading nook, sunlight spilling across the floor, and their faces would tilt toward me like flowers turning to light. One girl about 12 asked me one day, "Mrs. Carrington, why do you read the sad stories first?" I smiled. "Because sometimes sadness helps us see the happy parts more clearly." She nodded, thoughtful in the way children are when they half understand truth. Word spread quietly that I wasn't the monster the papers had made me out to be. A few neighbors stopped by again, at first awkwardly, bringing casseroles, then staying for tea. Even Margaret, who'd crossed the street for months to avoid me, appeared at my door one afternoon. "I was wrong about you, Evelyn," she said softly. "You did what most of us wouldn't have had the courage to do." I didn't need her apology, but I accepted it anyway. Sometimes forgiveness isn't for the person who hurt you. It's for the space it opens inside you afterward. As the weeks turned into months, I noticed something changing in the mirror. The deep lines around my mouth seemed less sharp, my eyes a little clearer. Not because I looked younger, but because I'd finally stopped waiting for pain to define me. One afternoon, while shelving books, I saw a familiar figure standing by the doorway. Melissa. Her hair was shorter, her expression unguarded. She held a small envelope in her hand. "I'm not here to fight," she said quietly. I needed to say I'm sorry." The words didn't land like an apology. They landed like a weight being set down between us. She told me she'd left Dalton, that she was trying to rebuild too, that she didn't expect forgiveness, only wanted me to know she'd finally understood why I fought back. I didn't answer right away. The air between us was thick with all the things we'd never said. Then I looked at her, really looked, at the tremor in her hand, the guilt behind her eyes, and for the first time I saw my daughter again, not the stranger who'd betrayed me. "Maybe someday," I said softly. "For now, let's just start with this." I reached out and took the envelope. Inside was a small photograph, Melissa as a baby in Gerald's arms. On the back, just 2 words, "Our beginning." She left without another word. But the moment lingered like the faint scent of lilacs after rain. That night, I placed the photo beside the fireplace and let it stay there. Not to honor the lies, but to remember how love, even broken, still shapes us. The next morning, I went out to the garden. The lilacs had bloomed overnight. I knelt, pressed my hands into the dirt, and felt life humming beneath my palms, steady, forgiving, patient. For the first time, I realized I wasn't rebuilding from nothing. I was rebuilding from truth. A year passed. The seasons turned gently, like pages I no longer rushed to read. The house by the lake had become smaller, simpler. I no longer kept rooms closed. The air moved freely, and so did I. Sometimes I'd wake early, make tea, and sit on the porch to watch the sunrise crawl over the water. It looked different now. Less like an ending, more like forgiveness painted in gold. People still whispered when I walked into town, but their voices no longer mattered. They didn't know the cost of truth, or how much strength it takes to carry your own name when others try to stain it. I used to think age was about years. Now I know it's about clarity, the quiet understanding of what's worth keeping, and what you finally let go. Melissa sent letters sometimes. Short ones. She was working at a community clinic in another state, helping women who'd lost everything to deceit. She didn't ask for forgiveness anymore. She just wrote about her days, her patience, the small good things she'd learned to love again. I wrote back sometimes, slowly, carefully, words like small steps across a broken bridge. One afternoon, while sorting through papers for donation, I found Gerald's old watch, the one he wore on our wedding day. The leather strap was cracked, the hands frozen at 11:17. I almost threw it away. Then I stopped. It didn't deserve a place of honor, but it didn't deserve to be forgotten either. I placed it on the mantel, not as memory, but as proof of survival. That night the sky was clear. The stars looked closer than they had in years. I sat outside, the lake whispering in the dark, and realized that peace doesn't arrive all at once. It settles quietly, like dust after a storm. I'm 69 now. I still visit the library, still read to the children. Some call me Miss Evelyn, others Grandma Evie. Every time I see their faces light up when a story begins, I remember what I once forgot, that even pain can be a beginning if you let it teach you. And sometimes when I tell them tales of courage and loss, I see Melissa's little girl face in the crowd again, listening. Maybe that's the strange mercy of life. It gives you echoes of what you lost, not to torment you, but to remind you it was real. I've stopped trying to erase the past. I carry it differently now, lighter, like something that once cut deep but taught me how to heal. Before I go to bed, I whisper a small prayer to the quiet, not for more time but for more truth. Because truth, I've learned, isn't the opposite of love. It's the proof that love ever existed at all. The wind shifts outside my window. Somewhere a new day is waiting, and I'm ready to meet it. If Evelyn's story touched you today, tell me in the comments. Have you ever faced a truth that cost you everything but gave you back yourself? Your words might be the one someone else needs to hear tonight. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that stay with you long after they end.